Hi there, this is Izzy, and this week I want to do a little bit of an unusual repotting for me. So I want to be repotting a plant all the way from sphagnum moss over to bark chips, and that plant is in flower. So the plant I want to repot is this Phalaenopsis Yuan Shan Sweet Girl. What a gorgeous little mini Phal this is. This is a complex hybrid but should have gorgeous yellow bordered flowers with a white centre, and as you might have noticed down there, this plant is in spike. How exciting. However, it's also potted in dense sphagnum moss, and that is ringing enough alarm bells for me that I'm going to take the risk of repotting this plant even though it's in spike. Now, I wouldn't normally touch a plant that's in bloom, but I'm concerned that the dense sphagnum moss will be too dense, not aerated enough for this plant in my conditions, and that this plant is at risk of suffocation if I leave it. I wouldn't normally repot a plant that's in spike because that plant can undergo a lot of stress during repotting, particularly when you change the medium, as we're going to do from sphagnum moss over to bark chips. So this is a stressful process. Flowering is a stressful process, and plants normally don't like both at once. So I'm going to take this quite cautiously, and we'll see how we go. First thing I'm going to do as part of this repot is soak this plant in water. This should help the plant's roots be more flexible, and it should help give the plant water to survive in the new medium for a few days, because I'm not going to water it immediately in the new medium, to help the roots to recover from any damage and to seal any wounds. So we'll just leave that to soak for a little while. Right, well, she's been soaking for about half an hour, and I've read some people say, oh, soak them for quite a while, and some people say, an hour or so. So I'm just going to see how this goes after half an hour. You can see, gosh, that sphagnum moss is sodden. This is exactly why I don't want it to stay in the sphagnum moss. So the first thing we're going to do is gently get it out this pot and tease apart that root ball with all of this dense sphagnum. Now, after all that, we can see that this plant is actually really quite healthy. I like that number of roots, and most of them are green, except you can see the ones that were running through the centre of the moss that weren't exposed to any light are very, very pale white because they don't have any chlorophyll in them. So this sphagnum moss that this plant was in was incredibly dense. If I had kept it in that sphagnum moss, it would have died in a couple of weeks. But with this plant out of the sphagnum moss, even though it's in spike, I'm quite hopeful about its prospects. There is something that worries me, which is kind of yellowing of this root here. Now I'm going to have to see if that's just the root dying off or something else. There are also some dark ends to these roots that I will watch as this plant grows and develops in its new medium. So I'm going to be potting this plant into orchid bark, and I'm expecting a little bit of root loss because often plants changing media do experience some root loss from the shock and from the change. So I still want to put it in I still want to put this plant in bark because this is going to be better for the plant's health in the long run in my environment. I've chosen this pot for it, which is a fairly nice, light and airy pot with an air cone at the bottom. And it's slightly larger than the old pot because I didn't have one the size of the old pot, but the plant's going to fit in here quite nicely. So our main job next is to fill it up with bark. And there you have it. I'm just going to dry the crown out because this Phalaenopsis did fall into the water and did get quite wet all over. Last thing I want to do now, just repotted it, is also to give it crown rot. That would not be fun. So there we have it. That's the Phalaenopsis Yuan Shan Sweet Girl potted up into orchid bark. Now the last thing to note is I am not going to be watering this orchid for a few days now. Why? Well, the repotting process damages the roots in ways that we can't see. So this orchid is going to need a little bit of time to seal those wounds like you would with a scab. And the best way for it to seal those wounds is with a little bit of a drying period. So I'm going to wait a few days, perhaps up to a week, before watering this again, and that should give this orchid a chance to dry its roots. I also fancy putting this orchid in a nice decorative pot. There we go. This one's going to look beautiful in the future when it's got those lovely yellow flowers. Thank you ever so much for watching. That's it from me for this week. If you've liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you've got any thoughts, please pop them down in the comments section down below. If you'd like to see more videos, just subscribe to the channel. I bring out new ones every week. But for now, that's it. Bye.